when the narcissist is gone. And the reality hits like a storm. When the narcissist is finally gone, the silence doesn't feel peaceful. It feels deafening. The mind, long accustomed to chaos, begins to ache in the absence of noise. This is what psychologists often call post-traumatic withdrawal, a psychological detox where the nervous system, once addicted to emotional intensity, begins to tremble in the emptiness that follows. It's not that you miss the abuse, no, you miss the familiarity of the emotional storm. Dr. Ramani Durvasula, a clinical psychologist known for her work on narcissistic trauma, explains that survivors often crave the chaos because their body has been trained to equate unpredictability with love. When that chaos disappears, the mind doesn't yet know what peace feels like. It mistakes quiet for danger. The first wave that hits you is disbelief. You stare into the void where their presence used to be and realize how much space they occupied. Not just in your home or your messages, but in your thoughts, your reflexes, your identity. You wake up expecting to flinch, expecting to over-explain, expecting to apologize. This reflexive state, psychologists note, is the residue of hypervigilance, a survival mechanism your brain built to avoid emotional punishment. For months or even years, your nervous system has been sprinting through a minefield, scanning for cues to stay safe. When the danger is gone, that system doesn't immediately slow down. Keeps running, desperate to protect you from a threat that no longer exists. And then comes the quiet, the eerie quiet. Many survivors describe it as a kind of spiritual vertigo. You no longer have to monitor every word, every glance, every text. There's no one dissecting your tone, no one turning your kindness into currency. But this quiet isn't immediately soothing, it's disorienting. Dr. Judith Herman, one of the leading researchers on trauma recovery, calls this stage the collapse of the known world. After long-term psychological manipulation, your mind equates stillness with abandonment. So when peace arrives, it feels like a void, a terrifying emptiness rather than a healing space. This is the paradox of liberation. Freedom comes first as grief. You grieve not just the narcissist, but the fantasy, the story you built around them, the hope that one day they would see you, the dream that all your effort would finally make them love you right. Psychologists often compare this to grieving a ghost. The relationship was built on illusion, yet the pain feels real because your emotional investment was real. You loved with sincerity in a world that rewarded deceit. That dissonance between truth and illusion is what causes the deepest ache. Then there's the identity shock. You stand in front of yourself and realize you no longer recognize the person you became. During the relationship, you unconsciously molded yourself into whatever version they demanded, quieter, smaller, easier to control. You silenced your opinions to keep the peace, postponed your needs to avoid confrontation, and called it love. Now, without their gravitational pull, you feel suspended in uncertainty. Who are you when you are no longer someone's mirror? Psychologists refer to this as identity diffusion, a temporary blurring of the self after prolonged emotional domination. But this moment, painful as it is, also marks the threshold of rebirth. This is the moment when your healing truly begins, not when you feel strong, but when you begin to question. When you ask, "Who am I now?" you are already reclaiming your narrative. Clinical psychologist Dr. Lindsay Gibson describes this stage as the reparenting of the self, the process of nurturing your neglected parts back to life. It's not about becoming who you were before the narcissist. It's about discovering the self that survived them. You will, at times, feel the urge to return, to peek at their social media, to decode their silence, to see if they regret losing you. This urge isn't weakness. It's the brain seeking closure in a story that never offered any. Trauma bonds, as psychologists explain, operate much like chemical addictions. Your mind craves the highs and lows, the emotional rush of intermittent validation. The only way to heal is through abstinence, complete emotional no contact. Each time you resist the urge to reach out, you're rewiring your neural pathways, teaching your brain that safety is not found in chaos, but in calm. You may also feel guilty for your anger or ashamed of your sadness. You might wonder why you still think of them, why you still feel broken when you should feel free. Remember, healing isn't linear. Psychologists emphasize that recovery from narcissistic abuse involves oscillation, waves of clarity followed by waves of longing. It's the psyche detoxing from illusion, flushing out the emotional toxins of manipulation. Don't mistake this turbulence for regression. It's evidence of your nervous system rebalancing, your soul reorienting toward peace. And as time passes, something subtle begins to shift. The silence that once terrified you begins to cradle you. You start to notice the small joys that were once overshadowed by their chaos. The sound of your breath, the light through your window, the laughter of people who love you without condition. These are not small things. They are the architecture of a new life. Psychologists often say that survivors of narcissistic abuse develop a heightened emotional intelligence, a deep intuitive radar for authenticity. What once was your curse, your sensitivity, becomes your compass. So, if you find yourself in that strange in-between space, no longer in the storm but not yet at peace, know that this is where transformation takes root. This is where your nervous system learns that peace can exist without fear, that love can exist without pain, that you can exist without them. Because healing from a narcissist is not about forgetting the darkness. It's about remembering your own light. Who am I when they're no longer in my life? It's one of the most haunting questions survivors whisper into the stillness after the narcissist is gone. It's a question that doesn't just come from the mind, it comes from the soul. Psychologists often describe this moment as identity reclamation, a process where your psyche, once fractured by manipulation and dependency, begins to rebuild the architecture of self. But it's not easy. When your identity has been intertwined with someone who constantly redefined your worth through their gaze, detangling yourself feels like peeling away from your own skin. This is why revisiting your past, your true self before the storm, becomes an act of psychological resurrection. When you look at those old photographs of yourself before the gaslighting, before the erosion of your boundaries, you're not merely reminiscing. You're reconnecting with neural pathways that once held joy, innocence, and self-trust. Psychologists explain that trauma severs the continuity of identity. By reconnecting with visual memories, you are reestablishing a psychological bridge between who you were and who you are becoming. Notice the eyes in those photos, the carefree posture, the way your smile wasn't rehearsed. That version of you still exists. It's just been buried under years of emotional debris. By remembering them, you're telling your nervous system, I am still here. Then comes the grief for the illusion, a stage every survivor inevitably faces. This grief is profound, not because you miss them, but because you miss the idea of them. Psychologists refer to this as mourning the fantasy bond, a process where the victim must emotionally separate from the image the narcissist crafted to ensnare them. That charming, attentive, adoring person who once made you feel like the center of the universe was never real. They were a projection, a mask designed to extract your empathy and devotion. Dr. Craig Malkin, a leading researcher on narcissism, explains that narcissists mirror your deepest desires back to you. You weren't loved for who you were. You were loved for what you reflected: admiration, loyalty, light. That's why the grief feels so complicated. You're mourning a ghost that never truly existed. It's like standing over an empty grave, crying for a love story that was built on manipulation. And yet, psychologists insist this mourning is essential. It's how the psyche detoxes from illusion. To heal, you must allow yourself to grieve, not just for what happened, but for what never happened. Journal it, speak it aloud, cry if you must. There's nothing delusional about missing a person who never existed. It simply means your capacity for love was real, even if theirs was not. This stage also brings a brutal realization. You were never unworthy, you were targeted for your worth. Narcissists seek out those who radiate warmth, empathy, and light, because these are the very things they lack. As Dr. Carol McBride, author of Will I Ever Be Free of You, notes, narcissists feed off your empathy like oxygen. They exploit the purity of your intentions to maintain their fragile self-esteem. So when you question, why wasn't I enough? Understand this truth: you were never supposed to be enough for someone whose emptiness cannot be filled. They weren't rejecting your value. They were rejecting their reflection in your light. And then, without fanfare, comes the awakening. It doesn't happen in a thunderclap moment. It arrives quietly, like dawn creeping through the cracks of a once dark room. One morning you wake up, and you no longer check your phone to see if they've returned. The ache begins to soften. Your thoughts no longer orbit around their absence. You stop rehearsing speeches in your head. Stop composing imaginary texts. You simply breathe. This is what psychologists call nervous system regulation, the body beginning to unlearn survival mode. When the trauma bond loosens, your brain starts to release its dependency on cortisol and adrenaline, those chemicals that once tied your sense of safety to chaos. You begin to notice small miracles. The stillness that once scared you now feels like peace. The quiet doesn't echo anymore. It holds you. Your body, once hyper-alert to rejection, starts to relax. You may even begin to laugh again. A genuine, spontaneous laugh that surprises you. This is what trauma therapists call emotional recalibration. Your body is learning that calm can coexist with safety, that silence can be sanctuary, not punishment. If you're not there yet, don't despair. Healing is not a straight road, it's a spiral. You will revisit old wounds, question your progress, and sometimes feel like you're back where you started. But as trauma psychologist Dr. Bessel van der Kolk reminds us, the body keeps the score, but it also keeps the map. Every tear, every sleepless night, every hard boundary you enforce is part of the rewiring. The pain is not punishment, it's purification. You are not breaking down, you are breaking free. And perhaps the most profound truth of all, you didn't lose anything real. You escaped something counterfeit. The narcissist's love was an illusion built on control, and when it shattered, it revealed the truth. You were always the one with the real heart. Their world will continue to orbit around deception and emptiness, but yours, now, is returning to authenticity. Your reality isn't collapsing. It's reassembling itself into something stronger, wiser, and infinitely more peaceful. So when you look in the mirror and ask, "Who am I now?" know this, you are the survivor of an invisible war. You are the person who walked through psychological fire and came out holding your own soul intact. You are not what the narcissist made you to be, you are what you choose to become now. And as psychologists often tell survivors, recovery doesn't end with freedom from the narcissist. It begins with falling in love with yourself again. Because the silence that once broke you, that silence is now your rebirth.